What's happening, everybody? Brent, Emily Leiker, syracuse.com, and we are here to talk some Syracuse football recruiting. Now, there has been a lot going on the Syracuse football front. Perhaps you've noticed Emily and our syracuse.com reporter, Ann Hayes, we borrowed her in the sports department this week. She's an honorary football reporter, which I know her mother is a very big fan of, by the way. Emily and Ann did extensive reporting, continue to do extensive reporting on the LeQuint Allen situation. Okay, so we did another video about that. We're going to put that in the description here of this video. You can find it on Syracuse Orange Sports on YouTube as well. So if you're looking for insight and conversation on LeQuint Allen, you can find it in that video, and you can find the coverage on syracuse.com. What we're going to focus on in this video is a little Cruton, because wow, what a run for Syracuse football in recruiting. And boy, people were feeling good about that, Emily, before, of course, the LeQuint Allen situation came in and kind of changed the conversation a bit. But before Syracuse went into the dead period they're in now, which will extend until July 26th, boy, the commits just kept coming. So let's just start with kind of a broad overview here of what were you thinking when you were certainly very busy following, tracking, looking at all these commits coming in, and just Syracuse adding to the class of 2024 just in bulk, it seemed. They went to Costco and picked up a bunch of recruits.
Yeah, so three commitments in one day on Monday, which is a lot to deal with. Lucky for me, they had spaced them out and they weren't all committing at the same time, which was definitely helpful.
We appreciate that.
And they all committed before 8 p.m., which was also huge.
Huge.
Thank you. If you're a recruit listening, please do that.
Thank you.
So that put the class at 15. They, of course, lost quarterback Brendan Zerbrug that day. He decommitted and decided he's going to go to Northwestern. So 15 members in the class currently, per the 247 sports composite ranking, which we can talk about why that's the one I use in a second. The class is number 34 in the country right now, which is really high. It's around 11 or 10 in the ACC. I haven't checked. Obviously, with the news in the past 48 hours, I've been a little sidetracked, but ACC recruiting looking good overall as well. So that's an interesting thing to consider. But yeah, this is a strong class. All but one of the players currently in the class is ranked. Most of them are 3 stars. They have 1 4-star in there. There's a couple more guys that were on visits recently that could be announcing commitments soon. I know Tavion Galloway is a 4-star tight end. He was on campus recently. I don't think there's a commitment date set for him, but definitely keep your eye on him. I'm sure there will be a couple more, obviously, in the summer, but worth noting, there is a dead period now for recruiting. So per the NCAA recruiting calendar, there's not going to be any official visits for the next month. There's not going to be really any recruiting connections of any time. This is also when I know SU football is on its 3-week summer break.
A rare break for those guys.
So this is going to be a little bit of a slow period. Of course, that doesn't mean kids can't commit.
I was going to say they can still commit at this time. They just can't have visits and official contact with the coaching staff.
Yeah. So as it stands, Wednesday when we're recording this, 15 members of the class. There's not going to be any more official visits for right now. Number 34 class in the country.
That's impressive. And you brought it up. That still puts Syracuse 10 or 11 in the ACC. Now, it should be noted, you are rewarded in recruiting rankings by volume. Syracuse has 15 commits, so that's going to bump them up the list a little bit. But look at this. Clemson ranks in the top 11. North Carolina, Pitt, Georgia Tech, Florida State, Wake Forest, Duke, Miami, Louisville, Virginia Tech, all in the top, 30 to 35. There's Syracuse right there. So Syracuse can't catch a break even when they're on a huge run, because their ACC brethren are also doing really well here. And I guess it's needed from a football standpoint, Emily, because, the ACC is kind of taken some hits in the past few weeks here, all the realignment talk and who's in the Magnificent Seven and who's not and all this. But recruiting-wise, the ACC seems to be doing really well here. Now, what we have to focus on here, Emily, if there is a pattern that emerges, it's Jersey. New Jersey. Why is New Jersey such a huge part of this influx of Syracuse commits?
Yeah, I think SU has strong ties to the region. This kind of dates back to last year's cycle as well. Obviously, Nick Monroe, who was the safeties coach but is no longer here, was known for heavily recruiting New Jersey. there was a lot of New Jersey and still are a lot of New Jersey players on the roster currently. Obviously, Deuce Chestnut, LaQuinn Allen, Elijah Clark. I believe Trevor Pena is also from New Jersey. There's about 8 or 9 of them that are from the Garden State already on the team. When Monroe left in January, I think a lot of people were kind of like, okay, who's gonna go get these
people
Jersey
were freaking
kids?
out. That's what happened. And for good reason. The guy was a heck of a recruiter. Yeah.
We need these Jersey kids. Monroe is a good recruiter in general. And so seemingly to combat that loss, SU hired Nunzio Campanelli to be the tight ends coach. He is considered to be in what the New York Times has called the first family of New Jersey high school football. That's an article from years ago, but you can track it down.
I'm resisting some references here from some movies that I'm a big fan of, but I like that description. I'll hold off for now.
But yeah, definitely a guy with really strong connections.
Make you an offer you can't refuse. Recruiting. I'm talking about recruiting. That's what I'm talking about.
Nunzio Campanelli, definitely a guy with strong ties to the region. And then they also brought in Dennis Thomas as their director of high school relations after Khalil Ahmad left for Penn State. That's another guy. He was actually LaQuinn Allen's coach in high school. So now you have 2 guys who are in the recruiting department going after this state. That's got some good players for the Northeast region.
Look, in New Jersey, man, Paul Pasqualoni, not to go old school on it here, but back in my day, Paul Pasqualoni and George DeLeon owned that state. They would go to that state. The coaches loved them. You know, I've heard stories of how Paul and George would bring food to these coaches. They were just royalty, right? Like they could just go in that state and take what they wanted, right? Like, and Ray Rice is kind of the line. Right, Syracuse had Ray Rice committed out of New Jersey, right? Pasqualoni gets fired, gone. That starts the downfall. That coincides with Greg Schiano, like getting Rutgers, which for so long was just a doormat in college football. It got its act together, right? And Syracuse has been trying ever since to have success in New Jersey. Now, look, they've had Tommy DeVito, right? Like they've had players from Jersey. It's not like it was a complete dry spell here, but they have 6 commits from that state to have royalty, first family, right? In that state. You mentioned Dennis Thomas, kind of an under the radar thing, like, coordinator of high school. What's his title?
Director of high school
Director
relations.
of recruiting. Like, you don't hear about those guys, but they're important because they're the ones setting up the visits, talking to recruits, like that first line of communication, if you will. So Jersey has been huge for Syracuse in this cycle. It'll continue to be huge in this cycle, and what a boon it was for the Orange. Is there a player or two? I mean, recruiting is always, you're speculating about the future, of course, but is there a player or two from Jersey that, you know, that sticks out to you that Syracuse landed here?
That's a good question.
Because I don't know. Like, that's the beauty of this. You get all these players coming in, 3 stars, 4 stars. You're kind of wondering, like, man, who are the guys that really stand out here?
I think the Dye brothers stand out to me. I've already been able to talk to them. You can find a feature I did on them on syracuse.com. It's from a couple months ago. Talks about them losing their mom and stuff like that. But these are 2 guys that I think both really talented. What's intriguing to me is they're both multi-positional players. One of them usually specializes in kind of the offensive side and the other is defense. I was told by them both were being recruited as linebackers by Syracuse. But those are 2 guys I think that are going to come in and seem to really have the values of this program, which is no surprise. We know Dino prioritizes certain things. You want kids to be in the Ohana, the family, and that's something that's really important to them. So Trayvon and Trayshawn Dye, I think, are kind of high on my list from New Jersey. The most recent one was Teron Hale, the 3-star wide receiver that came in the other night. He was the last commit on Monday. I think that's a good pickup as well. That's one I was intrigued with. You know, he's intrigued by offensive weapons, right? And I was talking to somebody who reminded me about this, that there, and you know this as well as anybody, Emily, there is a thin line sometimes between 3 stars and 4 stars, right? If it depends on kind of where you fall in the rankings. You know, you brought it up. So tell us about why the composite rankings is the one that you go with. And I think that kind of falls in line with a player like that we were talking about. And
where that line can be between what their ranking is.
Yeah. So like each individual recruiting site, 247, On3, ESPN has one, does their own individual rankings, and all of them, like you can read up on the mathematics of how they grade these kids and when they really start to look at them and stuff. The 247 composite, which is listed differently, like you can see it in comparison to the 247 just standard ranking, aggregates all of those major recruiting sites. So it looks at like the full scope of places ranking these players. And in my opinion, that's a little bit more accurate than just looking at one site. So I'll use that, but it does lead to discrepancies sometime. One that people have kept pointing out to me is Jamie Tremble. He is a tight end. He's a 4-star by 247's individual site ranking, but per the composite is only a 3-star. So I've been listing him as a 3-star because I always use the composite. People have been like, oh, he's a 4-star. Yes, technically by 247's ranking, but by the composite, he's a 3-star. So if you ever see that discrepancy, particularly in my writing, that's why. It
sounds like when I would beg the teacher to grade on a curve. I just 88, really? You couldn't give me a 90, Mr. Rogers? Not that I'm thinking of any specific teachers from back in the day. You know, I love you, Mr. Rogers. Okay. Emily, when you have these conversations, we're going to focus on a few players. Now, there's 15 guys. We'd be here all day if we talked about all of them. So we're going to focus on a few. We've written about a bunch of them. You can check out the coverage on syracuse.com. But let's focus on a few that pop here. You always got to talk about a quarterback, right? Jakari Williams. Now, I was talking to a couple of people about him, and I wonder if you've heard the same. Now, look, if the next Donovan McNabb wants to walk in the door, you take him. But coaches have a type. Jason Beck has a type that he wants to put in his offense. What I've heard about Williams, and I wonder if you've heard the same, is he's kind of like Bryce Perkins. Think of the Virginia quarterback from a couple of years ago. The comparisons are there. I think that's why Beck focused on him. What do you know about Jakari? What can you tell us about?
Yeah, I mean, he's a dual threat, which definitely also goes into the Jason Beck kind of style quarterback he looks for. We know loves to put a quarterback on his feet and make him run. We know that's something Garrett Schrader does. That was something Brennan Armstrong did. Certainly Bryce Perkins as well. So I think from that aspect, it definitely checks out. It's worth noting he was committed to Georgia Tech, which has one of the highest ranked recruiting classes in the ACC right now. I believe a top 25 one nationally as well. Decommitted from them to commit to Syracuse. He's the first 4-star in the class. I think just overall, this is a kid that SU needed. As we all know, they tried to get a quarterback last cycle, and
what happened with that?
It didn't work out.
Another thing people freaked out about,
yes,
but they seemingly have recovered from. You know, we'll say you got to sign on the dotted line as always. These are verbal commitments. We should reiterate that, but you know, it's not a complete recovery from this, if you will, but it seems to be an important addition.
Yeah, they needed to sign a quarterback in this class, and I think it's important. Or they need to get a commitment so that they could eventually sign a quarterback in this class. And I think it's important that it's a 4-star. I mean, pretty much all of SU's QBs, I think recently that have been starters are around a 4-star. Garrett was, I believe. Carlos Del Real Wilson, when he transferred in prior to last season, was a 4-star. So this is kind of keeping with the stock of quarterbacks that SU already has. So I got to get into some more game film on him and stuff. Obviously, Monday was busy and then Tuesday was busier. But I think this is a promising get for Syracuse.
Well, it's always encouraging when an offensive tackle from Texas commits to Syracuse. Willie Goodacre. I think people were excited about this. So tell us about him.
Yeah, so like you said, 3-star offensive tackle from Texas. The big thing that stood out to me during his commitment ceremony, which was live streamed, which kind of tells you that it was a big deal probably, is that his high school runs pretty much the same offense as SU. It's a very run option, read option heavy, lots of QB rushes, that type of stuff. The high school had one of the top quarterbacks in the 2023 or maybe this class, Jackson Arnold, I believe is his name. So Goodacre feels very confident that he can come in and make an impact early, which I think is always something you're looking for in terms of that style of play. There's a couple jokes made in his commitment ceremony that they should have hosted it outside of an IHOP because of how many pancakes he made. And from seeing his highlights, I can confirm there were a lot of pancakes. So we know that Dino always prioritizes the hippos, the rhinos, as he calls them in these recruiting classes. And SU went really heavy with that last year and seems to be easing a little off of it this year, which would make sense. But I think in terms of quality, what they've done on both the offensive and defensive line with David McMorris and Tristan Graham so far in this recruiting class is pretty strong.
And I'll be curious if Willie or any of the Hippos and Rhinos, as you mentioned, reference Matthew Bergeron. I mean, how important is it if you're Syracuse football? They just had a great draft. Bergeron, one of their highest draft picks in years, and it shows a path, right? If you're a kid sitting there watching the NFL draft and there's an offensive tackle, Bergeron's going to play guard at the next level, but there's an offensive lineman from Syracuse University that can only help. It's fresh in your mind, and what a tool recruiting-wise for this staff. Staying on the offensive front here, Emily, let's go to Jaden Hart, a running back addition for the Orange.
Yeah, so top 10 kid from Michigan, plays at Michigan City. From Michigan City, Indiana, ? It's Michigan City. I don't know if it's Michigan State.
It's like Kansas City, Missouri,
Kansas City, while I consult my list. Michigan City, Indiana.
There you go. A lot of different states and cities there.
Top 10 running back or top 10 player in Indiana. Talked to his coach the other day, Cody French. What really, really stood out to me is this is a brand new coach. He's only been working with Hart for a couple months, but he said that getting to coach Hart is one of the reasons he took this job.
Oh, wow.
So if that doesn't tell you something about a kid, I don't know what does. This is a kid that's really well known in the Michigan City area. He recently was helping out at a camp, and this coach was like, yeah, all the kids knew him by name and stuff. Like, that's kind of big for a high school player. In terms of like actual kind of skill set and things like that, they mentioned that he is already really good at his route running and kind of pass catching abilities as a running back, and that's something they're going to be highlighting this season. And that stood out to me because, as we know, SU tried to get Sean Tucker more into the passing game, the pass catching game. He's not passing the ball, but he's catching it last season, and to some success. I don't think it went as well as they hoped, but they had LaQuinn Allen do some of that, and he was really good at it. So that's definitely the style of running back I think SU wants as well, is someone that can be a little bit of like not multi-positional, but multi-skill set and able to do that. And then just a tidbit I'll throw in there that I think SU fans might find reassuring is that the Hart's head coach did tell me that Hart was impressed by the plans for the facilities. I know that's something that SU has been touting a lot, and everyone's kind of been like, okay, well, when are they going to get finished? And like, is that actually impressive to recruits? And I am hearing that it is.
Look, that's encouraging to hear, because all you hear about is NIL these days. Facilities are important. Like, I don't know how much they essentially seal the deal anymore. I mean, this is not the 1980s when a kid would come in and be like, whoa, look at the dome, I'm coming here. Like, that was a selling point for a while. And the dome obviously has made major improvements. But you want to show, like, if you're a kid, especially that's been to some other places where the facilities are better, like Syracuse is at least on the line there. So that is encouraging from that front. Like you said, there's a lot of people out there like facilities. And there's others. It's like the old, what's the beer commercial? Tastes great, less filling. Facilities, NIL. So score one for facilities in that case. Tristan Graham, a #1 player in the state of Delaware, defensive end. I mean, that's pretty good. Yeah. I'd have, like you said, I'd like to see some more film and get some more analysis of it. But if you're getting the top player in a state, that's a big score here. Before we wrap up, though, Emily, is there anything else that just stood out to you about this process, the frequency in which they came, maybe a player we didn't mention or two, some things you heard from other coaches, or maybe something we didn't mention?
Yeah, I think it's just the volume to consider. Like, when we got out of this recruiting period last cycle, when it finished June and official visits were over, like, they did not have this many recruits, probably had about half committed.
I
don't know off the top of my head, but it was somewhere around half. It was certainly below 10. Obviously, they picked up more before early signing day, but to have this many this early, I think it provides a buffer for anyone potentially decommitting, which has already happened twice. There was also Syer Torrance who decommitted. I think it also, you kind of know there's a larger senior class, I believe, this year with Syracuse football. So bringing in more freshmen makes sense as well. But yeah, I think just the volume, noting how many are already committed, that's like an important thing. Because,
what? I'm glad you brought up Syer Torrance, because we should mention that. It kind of shows you, like, good for him, because his star has risen and the offers kept coming. Syracuse this is what jumped out to me, Emily. They were there early.
Mm-hmm.
And you better be, because he's in your own backyard, coming from CBA, of course. But I remember tweets from the fall, seeing coaches at those games, the commitment there. Of course, his brother Symir played at Syracuse as well, local kids. So that's the great story. The local kid stays home. It also seems to be a case of being there early doesn't help you, because it put him on the radar. His star rises. Now he's a commit at Michigan State. So that's a yin and a yang, because some commits love that. Like when they sign on the dotted line, you often hear like, man, Coach Babers was there first. Syracuse has been there from the beginning. They stuck with me, right? That's a common thread you hear. But you could also sometimes put somebody out there on the radar that maybe otherwise wouldn't be. So, that one stings to see a local kid go, but it's also a compliment to him and his game. And, the way he kind of rose in the recruiting rankings and now is going somewhere he's comfortable with. And I don't want to say it's a bigger deal than Syracuse, but obviously, the situation changed.
Yeah. Verbal commitments, it's also up in the air, and it's not as much of a hot button topic these days, because there are bigger and more pressing hot button topics in college sports. But there are a lot of people who have contested like the need for verbal commitments and been like, well, why don't we just let kids sign when they want to sign? Because when you commit in your junior season, like, of course, like not everyone's seen you yet. Like, of course, there's going to be more schools knocking on the door after they've seen the rest of your tape from that season, after they've seen you grow. Like 16 to 17-year-old looks so much different than an 18-year-old, looks so much different than when they actually end up on the field in a collegiate game at 19 or 20. So it's just such a shaky thing. And I know most of you always remember it, but like a verbal commitment, you got to get them to the line. So we'll see where class is at in December.
No better example than, of course, Lenora Sellers, who at the last minute, South Carolina kind of swooped in and got him to sign on the dotted line last year. But we're getting over that, right? We're adding to this class. We're getting over Nick Monroe moving on from Syracuse by moving on in this process. But we'll save a lot of that conversation and verbal commitments and the way it goes for a whole other conversation. For now, we thank you for watching. Emily Leiker, Brent Dax, syracuse.com. Read all of the coverage at syracuse.com. It has been a very busy recruiting season. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll catch you next time.